Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about a couple of different things that may cause an imbalance in your existing tank. Now, two of the things that we're going to talk about when I come back here are going to be things that you probably haven't really thought about. They're very simple things, simple changes that you make to your tank that can completely throw things off. When we come back, we'll talk about that. Hang in there with me. We'll be right back. So as fish keepers or hobbyists in the tropical fish trade, we do a lot of things constantly, especially if we have more than one tank. Some people are just simplistic about their hobby. They may have one or two tanks or just one tank, and that's their main focus. But for those of us who are in the hobby and collect a lot of different kinds of fish and have a lot of different tanks, there's always that situation where we create an imbalance in those tanks, and we don't do it intentionally. We don't even know that we're doing it pretty much most of the time. But I want to give you a couple of ideas on things that may be imbalancing your tank and creating an environment that kind of throws your tank off. Now, I'm not talking about just water parameters and those kinds of things. I'm literally talking about fish not getting along, fighting for space, fighting for territory, those kinds of things. But also, I want to talk about the chemical side of things where things might get thrown off and imbalanced. Now, the first thing I want to say is I am guilty of this myself as well, especially when I first got into the hobby. I was never satisfied with what I had. I was constantly changing and rearranging my tanks and trying to improve on them, making them better for me. And having a YouTube channel makes that easy to do simply because you have the resources to do it, number one. And number two, you can't make videos unless you're making changes all the time. So the reality of it is, I'm talking to the people that don't have YouTube channels but do watch this kind of channel and want to know if you're looking for a reason why your tanks might be imbalanced or you're having a sudden problem that just kind of popped up out of nowhere. Let's talk about some of the things that might be creating that environment and making those changes and driving you crazy. Now, the first thing, and this came up simply because somebody asked me a question today, and I thought about it for a little while, and I said to myself, you know, this really is an important subject. It's one of the subjects that I find often when I'm walking around a fish shop and a mom and pop place or big box stores are notorious for this kind of thing. But when I'm walking around and I'm watching people and I'm kind of listening all the time in the background of what people are doing, what their purchases are, what they're planning on doing with their tanks, and I'm in my head screaming, no, don't do that, don't do that. You're going to cause all kinds of problems. But, you know, you just don't walk around and try to tell everybody that they're going to create a big problem if they do such and such simply because it's none of your business, number one. And I don't like to get in people's faces and tell them that. Now, I will sometimes casually walk over to someone, especially if I feel they're vulnerable or they don't really know what they're doing, and I might suggest some advice to them. But the first thing that I notice with a lot of people is they're never satisfied with the tank that they have. In other words, they're always trying to improve on it, or they're trying to make changes that are just simply not going to work. In other words, the changes that they're making are not going to be something that is going to make that tank a balanced tank any longer. And the first thing is adding new fish. Whenever you're adding new fish, you're adding a whole new environment, especially if you're adding fish that are territorial. In my particular situation, I do a lot with discus fish. I mean, all around here are discus fish and angelfish and those sorts of fish. And those are the kinds of fish that are very, very territorial. Pistogrammas are territorial, ram cichlids are territorial. I mean, I could go on and on and on about the different types of fish that are very territorial and will cause a huge imbalance in your tank if you add to that tank. Now, if you've got a tank that you've had for a long period of time and you're getting kind of bored with it and you're not sure what to do, adding fish is probably the last thing that you want to do. If you're going to make those kinds of changes, you're going to have to be a little bit more dramatic about what you do, and you're going to have to understand that adding fish to a tank throws everything off, because now you have fish fighting for territory, you have fish that are sometimes not going to get along if you haven't done your research. You also have a situation where a lot of times these fish in the wild would never be together. A good example of that would be, I try to make my tanks from where they would originate. In other words, if I'm doing a South American tank, I try to keep everything South American in there because there's a better chance that everything's going to get along better. If I'm doing a Southeast Asian tank or an Australian tank or an African tank or something like that, I try to keep these tanks all in the same sort of environment so that everybody kind of gets along with each other. Now, things aren't going to be perfect in those situations either, but you've got a better chance of having a well-balanced tank if you have fish that normally would live together in the wild. They will typically settle out and they will do fine. Now, what I don't like to see people doing is have a perfectly balanced tank and add a species of fish that has no business being in there with what you have in the tank already. For example, this is a tank that I change quite often, but when I do change it, I change everything in it, and it's simply because this is the backdrop for my YouTube channel. But right now I've got 3 to 3.5 inch discus fish in here right now. Everything in this tank is South American. The Corridoras, the Plecos, I've got some ram cichlids and that kind of thing in here, and everybody seems to be able to find their place in here. Now, what I don't do typically is I don't buy 3 discus one day and then wait 2 weeks and buy 5 more discus and that kind of thing. That's just as bad as putting different species in tanks. Now, let's go back to what I was originally talking about and saying trying to keep a tank as natural to its original intention. In other words, if you're making a South American tank, try to keep it South American. Don't be adding rainbow fish in there and all kinds of things. These things can work, but you have more of a chance that they are not going to work, and it's also a little bit weird because the fish just don't interact in the same way as they would with a, for example, like I said, if you're making a South American tank, they're not going to interact like it would be in a real South American tank environment. So the second thing that you can do, especially with discus and angelfish, is create an environment. Now, this is number 2 on my list. I'm done with number 1. I've told you what I think about that, and I want you to listen to this, because this is another thing that is the most common problem that people don't think about, and they think it's going to work just fine, because in reality, you think to yourself, well, it should. The bottom line is, if you are buying discus fish, for example, let's just use discus as an example simply because that's behind me here. I know a lot about discus fish, and I know how they behave. I know the kinds of things that can create problems and so forth. What I don't like to see people do, let's say you have a 75 gallon or 120 gallon tank, and you've got maybe 6 or 7 discus fish in there. You've got your plecos, you've got your Siamese algae eaters, you've got your Corridoras, which are your bottom feeder cleanup teams and that kind of thing. And you maybe have some tetras in there, rummy nose, cardinals, whatever tetras are big enough that the discus aren't going to find as a good lunch. and your tank has been running for many, many months, and all of a sudden you just say, you know, I think I'm going to add a few more discus fish to the tank. Don't do that. The first thing that you're going to do is you're going to take that tank and throw it completely off balance, because the fish that are living in the tank at the time that you're making that change all know each other. They've already had their pecking order decided. They've already had the fights that they're going to have, the territories where they sleep. If you look at your tank at night, this is a good thing to do sometimes if you ever get a chance. Go in at night when your tank is completely dark and look at where your fish are. I guarantee you almost every single night when you go back, if you were to do that every night for a week, you would find that your discus are all in the same exact spot. And the reason for that is because they've settled on areas that each of them have decided is okay. When you start adding fish to that, you start throwing the balance off. And then there's fighting that goes on and all kinds of things. Now, a gentleman wrote to me the other day and he said, you know, I had, I can't remember the number of discus that he had, but I think it was somewhere around 10 or something like that discus. He had a pretty good sized tank and he wanted to add 3 more. But when he added those 3, the tank just became completely chaotic. And he was saying that they were fighting with each other, they were running off scared, they wouldn't even come around when he was feeding them. All kinds of things were going on that were just totally unusual to him, and it's kind of freaking him out. He's like, well, what's going on with this tank that I've had going for so long? The bottom line is he added 3 discus to a tank that was completely balanced and had no problems at all going on. He adds 3 more discus fish to that tank, and what happens? Those 3 discus and the rest of those 10 discus all absolutely do not have anything to do with each other as far as a relationship any longer, and the balance of the tank is thrown off completely. So don't do this. When you're deciding to do something like add fish to a tank or whatever, really give it a lot of thought, because there's going to be problems with that, and they're not anything that you can do about it. Now, if you are in a situation like that and you've already done this, take out the fish that you just added. If you've got a spare tank, hopefully you do. Everyone should have a quarantine tank. Everyone should have a hospital tank, especially if you have discus fish, angelfish, or some of these more beautiful centerpiece fish for your tank. Look at that situation. Take out the ones that you just put in there and see if the tank goes back to a normal situation. I will guarantee you 99.9% of the time, that's exactly what will happen. Fish are extreme creatures of habit, and if they know the tank, they're going to go right back to what they were doing before. So my suggestion to you is, if you decide you're going to do something different with your tank, a couple of things that you can do. Number one, you can remove, if you're having problems, this is only if you're having problems. Sometimes you get lucky and things work out just fine. Make sure the tank's big enough, number one. Number two, make sure when you're adding something such as discus to a tank that they're the same size as the discus that you already have in there. That's going to be helpful to you. And number three, make sure you have quarantined these fish before you ever put them in your main tank. And then the fourth thing that I want to talk about on this last point, and then I'm going to quit this video and I'm going to move on. But the fourth thing is to make sure that you have moved the objects in your tank around. In other words, you've sort of not completely re-landscaped it, but just enough to where everybody's kind of got to find their niche and their pecking order again, so that you don't have those kind of problems. It's simple. It's something that we don't think about because it's just, you know, why would you think about it? You would think if I add 3 more discus fish, they'll find their place in the tank and everything will be fine. That's not what's going to happen typically. I would say very small percentage of the time are you going to have that work out in your favor. So thank you for watching me today. I hope this was helpful for you people out there that are changing your tanks or unhappy with your tanks and moving things around and trying to enhance your tanks in some way. Make sure that you're doing these things that I talked about before you ever add fish to a tank, and also make sure your tanks are large enough and make sure the species in your tanks are compatible with each other, because there's a lot of problems that can go on with that too. Do your research, do your homework. That's always going to be your best friend, and you're always going to have the best results when you've done a little bit of homework and you understand what you're getting yourself into. It's not a cheap hobby. It's simply not a cheap hobby. Thank you for joining me today. We will see you on the next one. Until then, we're out of here.